Vietnam's retail sector is growing and getting a more sophisticated look. Take a peek at the biggest earner on Vietnam's millionaire list. Stay with us to share the Vietnamese passion for coffee.
Hello and welcome to Vietnam in Focus. We'll bring you updates from the business world here in Vietnam.
And of course, more insight from market players and policymakers in the country. I'm Quốc Khánh.
And I'm Thùy Dương, and this is Vietnam in Focus. Construction and real estate projects in Vietnam have flourished in the past 5 years. At this rate of urbanization, more construction is expected in big cities, though not with much consideration for energy efficiency. To tackle this, more campaigns advocating for green construction practices are making their way in the country.
The construction sector contributes 10 to 15% GDP to the economy and creates millions of jobs. However, construction consumes 40% energy and causes 30% in carbon dioxide or CO2 emission. Asian countries have begun to promote the use of green energy and measures to reduce greenhouse effect. Singapore is a typical case. This Marion country is famous for green building as well as recycling resources. Campaigns for energy-efficient building practices are increasing in Vietnam. However, the country is still facing some barriers to green standards implementation, such as unclear standards, low awareness, and inadequate technology, as well as design capacity.
Thế còn một cái thứ tư nữa là đối với bất động sản.
Another barrier is the lack of profitability in green building methods. Investors are afraid of suffering losses due to high costs. They are not the beneficiaries of green building, they are merely profit-driven. However, some business representatives pointed out the benefits in developing greener building in Vietnam.
You can see that in the country where green building and green in general develop is because governments give incentive, either in tax reduction or other type of incentive, or cost deduction on the product they buy, something like that. So I think government has a very what I've seen so far is that the government in Vietnam is really taking into consideration seriously the green building.
Vietnam is rapidly becoming more urbanized. The urban population at 29.8% in 2010 is expected to be 40% in 2020, which will trigger even more construction. Yet many projects in the country are currently not designed to adequately meet rapidly changing environmental needs. Green building is a deciding factor in enhancing life standards and reaching an ideal target of sustainable urban development.
Deep sea ports are crucial to boosting maritime trade between Vietnam and countries around the world. Yet, the infrastructure is currently still underdeveloped.
There is great potential for regional maritime trade for Vietnam. The country has almost 3,500 kilometers of coastline, excluding the islands. The spread of coastline bridges Southeast Asia to East Asian region. However, infrastructural setbacks still faced by the country curtail its geographical advantages. Right now, Vietnam only has 3 deep-sea ports: Hai Phong Port, Phan Phong Port, and Baria Phung Thao Port. And to date, construction is not completed at any of the 3 ports. The 3 deep-sea ports are expected to be fully finished in 2015. Our ports being able to accommodate larger ships would mean more goods can be transported simultaneously and at lower cost, consequently attracting more investments. When all deep-sea ports finish, the capacity at Vietnam seaports in 2020 to 2030 are expected to increase 4 to 8 times compared to that in 2009.
The deposit rate of Vietnam's banks is currently one of the highest in the region. The State Bank of Vietnam recently applied a new 14% limit for Vietnam Dome deposit. It follows the bank's failure to comply with the previous agreement to keep the rate at a maximum of 12%.
During December 2010, banks in Vietnam entered a race in increasing the interest rates. The chaos started after the chairman of National Financial Supervision Council, Lê Đức Thúy, announced that banks have the right to set their own rates as long as acceptable by the market. At the peak, some banks offered a rate at a record high 17% to 18% per annum. The State Bank of Vietnam had to intervene within 24 hours to reestablish order to the market. According to the State Bank, the mobilizing rates of 12 to 13% per annum are reasonable even in the case where inflation exceeds 2 digits. After the new announcement, some banks in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi agreed to keep the interest rate at a maximum 14%. This commitment, however, is not a legal enforcement, and thus no punishment are stipulated in case of violation.
It has been a tough year for Vietnam's stock market, but at the end of 2010, stocks are bouncing back to their all-year highs. The rise was mainly driven by the State Bank of Vietnam's decision to delay enforcement of stricter minimum capital requirements of 3,000 billion dong on commercial banks for another year.
As of mid-December, the average price per earning ratio of Vietnam shares is now around 11.7 times. PE of stocks listed on Ho Chi Minh Stock Exchange is recorded at 12.2 times, while it's around 9.5 times on the Hanoi Bourse. Bank shares led the group of gainers as they rose to the top of the trading bands across the board. Trading bands are set at 5% and 7% for stocks listed on the South and North bourses, respectively. Foreign investors have so far contributed significantly to the movement of both indices. Averagely, transactions made by foreign investors accounted for around 30% of the total volume of the daily traded shares. Foreign investors' trading is often monitored by the system, which also regularly updates and displays current room available for foreign investors for each particular stock. The room available for foreign investors is capped at 30% for all bank shares and 49% for stocks in other sectors. Currently, total market cap of Vietnam stocks reach around $33.8 billion. Of 15 businesses that have market value of more than $476 million, 7 are operating in the finance industry.
The number of rich people on Vietnam's stock market increased this year. 2010 saw 450 Vietnamese millionaires buy stock exchange assets, according to a list published by VnExpress.net, which is a prominent online media here in the country.
Every year for the past 5 years, a renowned media, VnExpress.net, released a list of top-earning people in Vietnam's stock market. In 2010, the performance of Vietnam's stock market is not as good as it was 3 or 4 years ago. The stock value held by the members of the list considerably deflated. According to VnExpress.net, 20 members are off the list in 2010 due to the shortfall of the market value or stock sale to restructure their portfolio. However, there are another 20 new members are added to the list, which helps the total assets of 100 richest people in 2010 increase by 30%. Asset by 20 top people on the 2010 list is estimated to be 60 trillion Vietnam dong, or around $3 billion.
2010 theo dự đoán của chúng tôi sẽ có khoảng 4 cá nhân.
Top 5 of 2010 list has a considerable change of the order. The richest person is also different from 2009. Assets of the richest increases by 43% compared to a year earlier. For names of top 5 remains in the list. The new face on top 5 comes from a real estate agency just listed on the stock market in 2010. At present, there are 450 Vietnamese millionaires by stock holdings calculated in US dollars. The richest person in 2010 just needs 4 trillion dong, or around $200 million, to be the first billionaire. The richest person in 2010 is Pham Nhật Vuong, owner of 2 companies, Vincom and Vinpearl, with total asset of 15.8 trillion Vietnam dong. Most of the people on the previous list are working in real estate sector, and the trend goes the same for 2010, despite a not so good performance of real estate stocks compared to a year earlier.
So it's just at that time of the year, right at the beginning, it's quite common to have all these kinds of lists.
Well, although it's fairly new for Vietnamese to have a millionaire list, This is just the 5th year running.
Already. Well, in the next part of Vietnam in Focus, we hope that you'll stay with us as we'll bring you a closer look on the retail sector here in Vietnam.
Stay with us. Welcome back to Vietnam in Focus. On this segment, we will take a closer look at these retail sectors in Vietnam.
In many developed markets, global retailers have been facing a changed landscape since the economic turbulence of 2009. In contrast, Vietnam's retail sector seems intact from this recession, thanks to a rise in consumer spending and confidence. However, real estate is still an obstacle, and competition remains strong both from domestic as well as foreign players.
Let's take a closer look at the story from our reporters Trinh and Ngọc Khoa.
A facelift. This is what happened in many big cities in Vietnam. The more apparent is in Ho Chi Minh City, the business hub of the nation. More developments changed the landscape of the city, and the retail sector also rapidly changing its facade. The country's retail look usually represented by traditional markets and individual shops, but now different varieties of retail outlets are emerging. Vietnam currently houses around 140 supermarkets, 5 hypermarkets, 20 trading centers, and also nearly 1 million square meter of floor area is currently under construction for retail business. Both domestic and foreign players continue to do well this year and have realized good profit. We plan to open another 4 hypermarkets in Ho Chi Minh City next year, with a size of more than 10,000 square meters each.
Yeah, right now we had 4 this year, and we have plans to keep that same pace of expansion, 4 or 5 stores for the next several years.
The rapid and consistent growth of Vietnam's retail market in recent years has made the country still an attractive destination to both domestic as well as multinational retailers. For the first 11 months of the year, Vietnam's retail sales are up 25% to more than $73 billion. This is according to a report from General Statistics Office. The increase has been driven by the consumer confidence, which is said to be the second highest in the world, according to a global market researcher, Nielsen.
So that was the current studying of the retail sector in Vietnam.
Yes, and it was mentioned that consumer confidence here in Vietnam drove the sales increase. Let's just have a look now here at the retail sales in 2010 and also the forecast. In 2 years, the sales volume is expected to increase by $7 billion.
The potentials, of course, pushed retailers to be more creative in expanding their market share.
The market trend is also changing with a shift in consumer behavior. One apparent sign now is how people are more willing to get fresh produce in modern retail outlets such as supermarkets and hypermarkets. I like to shop at these types of markets very much because the vegetables here are very fresh. The food is also being kept safe in a very clean environment. This opportunity is grabbed by many retail players in Vietnam, not just by giving more varieties on the shelves, but also doing outreach directly to the farmers to have more fresh produce and faster delivery.
Of 20,000 farmers, we've trained them on what we call Metro Gap, which is a quality standard, a minimum quality standard that we've worked out with the government for fruits and vegetables that we sell in the Metro stores. In the future, the very near future, the first quarter of next year, we plan to start training fishermen.
Thì chúng tôi là hợp tác lại với tất cả các hợp tác xã rau sạch.
We are working with Farming Association and clean vegetable growers in both Ho Chi Minh City and Đà Lạt to get the best supply with better prices. Local and foreign players started to build direct cooperative programs just like this one in Đà Lạt City, the capital of farms and plantations in Vietnam. For farmers, direct cooperation means they have to produce higher standards of harvest, but it also means they can have a better price, hence a bigger profit.
Khi mà giá bán, nếu mà mình bán theo cho thương lái bình thường thì với một cái giá ví dụ là 3.000 thì giá của Metro thường là được thêm 30%.
Other retailers also diversify its retail distribution channels by setting up small and medium-sized food store chains near densely populated areas, targeting female shoppers. We're still expanding the current network of our supermarkets, but at the same time, we're also diversifying our business with other types of retail stores, such as convenience and food stores, in order to serve and attract different groups of consumers. Meanwhile, many foreign invested retailers are also planning for an immediate expansion. For instance, South Korea's Lotte Group. This group has opened 2 supermarkets in Ho Chi Minh City in the past 2 years. It has also earmarked a $5 billion plan to develop a chain of 30 other stores in Vietnam over the next decade. However, market players are still facing with numerous barriers. Besides facing a fierce competition, many companies are stuck with finding desirable retail spaces.
The